Hey there, welcome back to Blender Gunpla. Today we are going to talk about how to create tubes, hoses, pipes, those sorts of things in Blender. There's a few different ways to do it, and we're going to use this scene here to create some different tubes that connect some of these boxes that I've set up ahead of time. So if you want to, I will share a link to this file as a starting point down in the description below. You can go grab that while we run the intro, and then we'll be back to make some pipes. Okay, so the basic way that we're going to make a pipe or a tube type of a shape here in Blender is that we'll make a curve, and then we'll use that as the guideline that our pipe will travel along. And so we need to play a bit with how to create and manipulate curves before we do anything else. So I'm going to just hide these objects real quick here just to get them out of our way. And you can follow along if you're running Blender and play a bit with how we manipulate the shapes of curves. So if I hit Shift A to add an object, in the past we've always added mesh objects. I think we've only dealt with mesh objects so far in Blender Gunpla. But Blender also allows us to create a few different types of curve objects, and we'll look at one of them now and the other one later on. So there's the Bezier curve and the NURBS curve, and they're just two different ways to manipulate the control points that control the shape of your curve. So we'll do the NURBS one first here. You'll see when I created that, it creates it down here at the origin, and it's not a very interesting looking curve, but if I hit Tab to go into edit mode here, you'll see it's actually defined by 4 points. And you can see it's kind of following this outline that the points create. So if the points create a polygonal sort of outline, the curve is following inside of there. So if I pull this one this way, you see how that end of the curve reacts. And if I pull this one this way, you'll see how the other end of the curve reacts. And I can add more segments to this, right? So if I hit E for extrude and I pull this way, then we see the curve start to go that way. So I can manipulate this and create new segments and create whatever sort of curve shape I want based on that. If I tab out of edit mode, then I have this curve. And I find it easier a lot of times to be working in straight on one of the axes, because you'll notice there when I was just manipulating that curve, I ended up with this weird three-dimensional curve that was hard to see that that's what was happening in real time while I was doing it. But that's what you end up with unless you're working like straight down on Z or straight from the side on X. Then you can be sure that the moves you're doing to those control points are only on two of the axes, and that you're keeping things lined up. But for the purposes of this playing around, this curve is just fine. And so once we have that curve defined, you'll see over here that for a curve object, we get this new properties panel that we haven't seen before. And you can also see up here in your scene collection that this is a curve object because it has that same little icon. This little green curve icon with the two vertices denotes a curve. Whereas if we go look at one of our objects in our scene there, these mesh objects have this triangle with the vertices. So that's a mesh object. This is a curve object. So we have to have a curve object to do what I'm about to do, and that's to go into this curve settings panel here. And these things are already opened up for me, so you might have to twirl down where it says geometry. And then again, you might have to twirl down where it says bevel. But under geometry and then bevel is the setting that we're after. And if we adjust this depth, you'll see that we get a tube that is wrapped around that curve basically. And then you can adjust the resolution to give yourself more segments. So if we zoom in real close, you can see that here at the end of this circle, it's not a perfect circle, right? There's flat segments. So if I turn up this resolution, it will add more and more segments in there to make it look more circular. So that's what that parameter does. So yeah, we can adjust the depth to adjust the sort of the thickness of our tube, and then the resolution adjusts how smooth the outline becomes. And that's it. Then we've created a pipe, right? So that's the end of the episode. No, it's not. There's plenty more to talk about, and we'll do that now with some more real world examples. So I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to turn our scene back on, and what I wanted to do with this Let's actually hide this object here because it's going to get in the way for a minute until we get to it later on. So we're going to focus on these two for now. I'd like to create some pipes that are coming up out of this angled surface here and kind of maybe coming up and then back down to the floor and then coming into this little box over here. So first of all, actually, why don't we create a little cylindrical area for those to go into. So I'm going to hold down shift and right click to move my 3D cursor to, I don't know, about right there. And I'm going to go ahead and add a cylinder. Yeah. I'm going to rotate that cylinder around the x-axis by 90 so that it turns it down toward us. And then I'm going to scale it down kind of like so. Even a little bit more probably. Yeah. And we'll move it in the Z up just a little bit. Cool. So that'll give us a kind of a place for our pipes to start and end. And actually we're going to do 3 of them. So I'm going to hit the ND fast menu and do an array on the x-axis, and I'm going to create 3 of these. I'm going to hold down control and use my mouse to kind of pull this down so they're sort of centered within that. I'm not trying to be exact here. I'm just trying to give us a little bit of an interesting thing to work with. We could do the same thing up here. Why don't we actually do that? So I'm going to right click, hold down shift and right click there to move my 3D cursor. Actually, let's look at it straight from this angle first and then do that. That'll kind of straighten that out a little bit better. And then we'll add a cylinder again. And we'll rotate it around the y-axis, and this one I'm gonna have to just kind of eyeball it to get it perpendicular to the surface. Doesn't have to be. Actually, let's see. I like it a little bit more vertical than that. So something like that, sure. Then we'll look at it this way again. We'll scale it down. We'll move it this way a bit. Scale it down a bit more. That seems fine. We're probably gonna have to move it that way on the Y so that we can make copies again. So array, this time we want it to go on the Y axis. I'm gonna roll up 2 more copies. I'm gonna hold down control and pull those in about like that. All right, so that had nothing to do with pipes. That was just bonus content. So now, let's create ourselves some curves to go from these cylinders to those cylinders. And this is the kind of tricky freeform part that you're gonna have to just probably play with these curve tools to get used to. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a Bezier curve this time, since we played with NURBS curves last time. It added it here where my 3D cursor is. And if we tab into edit mode, you'll see it's actually got 2 control points by default. So 2 ends to the curve, and I'm gonna pull this one like way out here just so that it gets out of our way for a minute. And then we'll play with this one as well. So I want this one kind of in the middle of that cylinder there. And you can also adjust the angle of these by playing with these control points. So that we're gonna pull this back over this way. We're gonna pull this one kind of like that. That's better. Get it right in the middle of there. And then we can again extrude. So I'm gonna extrude this kind of down this way, and then I'm gonna extrude it again. It's gonna go back that way eventually. But I'm gonna pull this up. I'm gonna pull this down. A lot of little adjustments to get things exactly as you want them. I'm gonna adjust the angle of this kind of like that. I'm gonna pull this one over this way. Now I'm gonna turn and look from this angle, and I'm gonna grab this point here, and I'm gonna pull it back over this way, and I've gotta turn the angle of this. We could put additional points in besides just the ones that we've got here, but I don't want to spend so much time just editing these points. So we're gonna do something kind of like that. Maybe pull that up a little. Maybe turn it that way just a little so that it kind of evens out that curve. All right, so we've got it going into there and coming out of there. I'll tab back out of edit mode, and now we can go over to our curve properties and we can give it some depth. And you'll see we start to get that kind of a tube. Now, once you see this, like this is fairly centered on there. This one's actually not. So at this point you could go in and make more adjustments. You wanted to try to get that thing perfectly centered there. Feel free to spend as much time as you like sort of tweaking and perfecting that. But yeah, that's now the problem is I just realized I would have liked this one to go over here to this cylinder so that so they're not overlapping one another. So I'm actually gonna fix that real quick. Let's move this one down here instead. I've moved it below the floor, so there we go. That seems better. All right, so now that I've done that, we can Shift D to duplicate this. We'll put the duplicate kind of over there somewhere, and then once again, we've got to go and adjust things to get this sort of shaped how we want it to be. So I'll adjust it from that angle, and then I'll come over here and I'll put that there. That seems fine. This one's up higher, so I need to drop it down a little probably. I need to pull this over kind of that way a bit. I need to probably adjust the angle of this and the angle of this. I'm not going to spend too much time making these look realistic actually. Now that I have shown you what to do, you can spend as much time as you'd like kind of tweaking these. But maybe something kind of like that for this one. Then we'll do one more real quick. So I'll duplicate this over to here. We'll tab into edit mode. We'll grab this one. We'll run it into there. We'll grab this one, kind of pull it this way. I'm gonna pull this one down so it's a lot lower than the others, I think. We'll shrink that in. We'll pull this out. Center that back up there. Pull that down. Give it more of an angle like this. Yeah. So they're not laying in like a realistic way. The physics probably aren't quite right. They're definitely not quite right, but that's a good enough example for now. All right, so we've got 3 pipe objects there. So that's one way to create these pipes, and you can see that it's very organic type of editing routine there. It's a lot less precise than probably anything else we've ever done on this series, because we're always dealing with straight edges and angles and, you know, typing exact dimensions in and that sort of thing. So this is a lot more fluid, and you could certainly make them look more realistic by adding more of those control points through there as well. So anyway, that's one way to create sort of very organic looking hoses and pipes. Another way to do this is to extract some geometry from an existing object. And so let's do that next actually. I'm going to turn back on this vertical wall that I had over here. I would like to create a pipe that comes out of here and kind of curves down and then back up and back into the wall. And in order to do that, I'm actually going to start with a cube. So I'm going to add a new cube to our scene here. It's way over here, but we'll move it over here close to this wall. And what I want to do is I want to scale this in the Z direction and make it nice and tall. So maybe about like that. I think also in the Y direction, just to make it a little wider as well. And then let's move it up so that it's touching the face of that wall, about like that. And I'm gonna go into edit mode on this cube, and I'm gonna select some edges and add some bevels to them to give them some curves. So that one there, I'm gonna hold down Shift and select this one and this one as well. Yeah, that seems good. And then I'm gonna go into the fast menu and choose Edge Bevel. I'm gonna roll the weight all the way up to 1.0, and then I'm gonna hold down Control and Alt, which adjusts the width of our bevel. Oh, and you'll see that our bevel is not uniform, like it's kind of at a weird angle. I'm gonna hit Escape and cancel out of here. That is because I forgot after I scaled that object to apply the scale. So Control A, apply, and then scale. Now back into edit mode, and we can edit our edge bevel again. So I'm rolling this all the way up, Control Alt, adjusting this. Those are much nicer looking bevels now, but I do want them to be curves. So I'm gonna hold down Alt and I'm gonna roll up the number of segments, maybe to about 16 or so. And now that I see those, I'm gonna make this bevel just a little bit bigger. So something like that. I'll lock that in. And what I'm trying to do now, or what I'd like to do, is I'd like to take this edge, this one that comes out of the wall there and then curves down and comes down here and curves over and then back up and curves back into the wall. And I would like to make that the basis for a pipe. And so to make that work, there's a couple things we could do, right? We can, if I try to tab into here and select that geometry, I can't select that edge because it's being generated by these bevels and I haven't applied those modifiers. So I could go over here and I could apply these bevel modifiers and that would give me an edge that I could select. But ND also gives me I think a better way to do that without applying the modifiers. So with the object selected, I can go into the ND menu and I can choose Geo Lift. What this allows us to do is select all or part of the calculated geometry of an object. So you'll see here it's showing the wireframe with like all of the modifiers applied and everything. And I could pick like this face and I could be like, give me a new object that is just that shape or just this shape or whatever. It starts out in face selection mode by default, but you can type the 1, 2, and 3 keys to go into vertex, edge, and face selection mode respectively. So if I choose 2 for edge mode, then I can pick this edge up here and I can use standard Blender selection modifiers. So if I hold down Control and click down here, for example, it selects that edge and everything in between. So I can keep following around here, holding down Control and clicking, and I can get this whole edge selected, which is what I was after. And then you'll see there under GeoLift, it says I can confirm the geometry with the spacebar. So I hit the spacebar and it will give me a new object that is just that edge that I had selected. And so now I can actually select the original box and just hit X and delete it. And we have this object here. Now, this is a mesh object. You can see that over here in our scene collection. It's got the mesh object icon. And so in order for us to make this the basis of a pipe, it needs to be a curve. And so we can right click here and we can say convert to, and we can change the mesh object to a curve. And now you'll see over here, it's a curve, and we have our curve properties down here that we can select from, and we can add some depth here to make a pipe. Now you'll see this is a better example of what we were talking about earlier with the profile of that pipe being fairly blocky, and you can see all of those edges. So this is a good case for wanting to ramp up this resolution quite a bit so that we get a nice rounded pipe instead. So there we have that. All right, so now we can create pipes, right? But they're just kind of smooth and not too terribly interesting looking. So I wanted to show you next a trick for adding some extra detail or texture or shape other than just the round cylindrical profile to these pipes. So if you think about like when you've built a high grade Zaku or maybe a master grade or real grade Zaku, if you've built one of those, they have the little power pipes and you have all of those little beads that you have to feed over the top of those pipes. And it's terribly intricate and kind of annoying, but it looks really cool when you're done, as long as you don't lose any of those parts. We can do basically that same thing with Blender. So let's take this pipe we just created and let's create some little beads that we can basically feed over the top of this thing to add some interest. I'm gonna create that bead from scratch, and I think I'm gonna remove or just hide all these objects in our scene real quick here first, because I want to create the bead at the origin. So I'm going to hold down Shift S, which pops up this little radial menu that lets me change my 3D cursor back to the world origin. So now my 3D cursor is back here. So new objects we create will live here at the world origin for a bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the ND fast menu and create, I guess, a recon poly. I'm going to pull the radius up. I'm going to hold down Alt and roll the number of segments up to create a nice circular shape, maybe 32. And I'm going to give this one an inner radius as well. So I'm going to hold down Control and move my mouse, and you'll see I get like this kind of donut shape. So I can adjust the outer one and the inner one. And maybe I want something about like that. We'll definitely scale this down. So I'm making this with a hole to fit around this pipe here, and it's obviously too big, but that's fine. So we'll hit our F menu again, go to Solidify, give this some thickness, and then we'll hit the F menu again, go to Bevel, and give it like a single segment chamfered edge like that. So that looks kind of like one of those Zaku beads, right? We'll scale it down a bit like so. All right, so now we just have to make a bunch of these and make them follow this edge or this curve over here. And the way we do that is with a modifier that we have to add manually. So this is not one that ND allows us or will add for us, but we can still use all of Blender's modifiers. And if you've never clicked add modifier over here and looked at all of them, there's a ton. And ND allows us shortcuts to do some of them, but not this one. So the one we want is called curve, and it's under the deform section here. So if we choose add modifier curve on our bead object here, you'll see nothing happened yet. But we did get our curve modifier here, and it's waiting for us to tell it which curve that it wants us, that we want to put this thing onto. And so we can hit our little eyedropper here and go just click on the curve. And you'll see now our bead disappeared. Where'd it go? It's over here somewhere, and that's not on the curve, right? So the problem is, or the easy solution for this is, you want your object that you're placing on your curve and your curve to have the same origin point. So if I have this selected, you can see its origin is this orange dot over here. If I select the curve, its origin is right here, kind of in the center of its geometry. The easiest thing to do in our case here is going to just be make this guy's origin be over here, because that's where our 3D cursor is. It's easy to do. So I can right click here and I can say set origin to the 3D cursor. And you'll see as soon as I do that, our little bead object jumps up here to the beginning of our curve. So that's the first thing that we've got to take care of. Now I'm going to zoom in over here, and this isn't quite oriented or shaped exactly like we want. It's definitely too big, but it's also turned wrong. So you can go over here to your curve modifier once you have that bead selected, and you can change the deform axis. And I'll play with all of them so you can see what it does, but X is that way, Y turns it that way, and then if I choose Z, that's the one we want. So it turns it so that the hole in our object is now along the curve. So I'm going to change our view over here. I'm going to scale this down until it looks like it's just fitting on the outside of that thing. So maybe something like that. Does that seem right? That seems pretty good. And now if I move this object along its Z-axis, now this is weird because remember it's sort of been turned and been, so it's moving along X as I move it along Z, but it's its local Z-axis, right? Before it got changed to follow this shape. I'm gonna just do that so that I can get it sort of started with a little bit of the pipe still showing behind there. And you'll see, actually, let me move this along the Z-axis some more. So watch this as it moves along. You'll see it turns and it follows the curve. So it is the curve modifier is working. And even when it goes around this bend like this, you'll see the top part of it deforms and gets a little bit wider while the bottom part gets narrower, so that it's shaping itself to form around that curve. So anyway, we'll leave it starting there, and all we have to do is make a bunch of copies of it, right? So the way we do that is with an array modifier, and we want to make sure that the axis for our array is the same as what our deform axis was for the curve. So that is the Z-axis. And now you'll see as I roll my mouse wheel up here, I get copies, and they're all following the curve. Now they're spread out a bit too far, but that's fine because we can adjust the offset by holding down Control, and now I'm moving the mouse back and I'm pulling them into, I don't know, maybe about right there. Does that seem good? And then we roll up some more copies until we get that. And maybe I want to pull that back just a little bit more so that the two ends here look about even. And yeah, zooming out and looking from a different direction, now we have that, which I think is pretty cool and is not too hard to do, right? You just create that object and then you use the curve modifier and make it follow that thing. So if I turn our scene back on, now we have that wall with this thing coming out of it. We have our three pipes over here. Now, just as a little bit of a bonus, I created ahead of time, and they're in your file if you started with this file as a starting place. I created some additional little bead objects that we could use to put on these other pipes. And so let's play a bit with those. So if you find this beads collection here, you'll see they're turned off. I'm going to turn the scene off again so that we can see them because they're going to appear here at the origin. So this is the first one. And all I did here was I used a couple of cylinders, top and bottom, to kind of cap it. And then these smaller cylinders here, 4 of them, to create this kind of a thing. So we can replicate this along one of these pipes. Let's do that. So we'll select it. We'll add our modifier, curve. We will change the, we'll select the curve object, I guess, first. So we'll put it on this curve. You'll see it disappeared weirdly, right? Because the curve needs to have its origin be the same as the bead we're putting it on. So I'm going to select the curve, set origin to the 3D cursor. Now you'll see that object showed up there at the start of the curve, but it's a little bit weird and it's way too big. So again, we're going to have to change our deform axis to Z. That's helped us a little bit. Again, it's still way too big. So I'm going to scale that down, not up. And I'm going to move it on the Z axis a bit to get it started kind of about there. Yeah? That was bad. I clicked wrongly. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. So now you can see, because this one's hollow, it's actually letting that pipe inside show through as well. So that's an effect that we'll sort of play with. I'm not sure if I like that or we'll make that smaller or bigger later on. But we can now add our array modifier. Now, one thing you'll notice as I do this, I'm going to choose the Z axis, which is the right thing to do, right? Well, that's what we did with the other one. But when I start to add more of these, they're showing up on the world Z axis instead of following the curve. The reason for that, I'm going to hit enter and just lock this in for a second. If we look over here on modifier stack, the ND by default added that array modifier at the end, and it is coming after the curve. We need it to be before the curve. So I'm going to grab the curve modifier and pull it down here. And you'll see now this is doing what we expected. So now we can go back into that array modifier and we can adjust our offset down so that we've got these kind of lined up just about like that, I think. And then we can roll up some more copies of this. Maybe to about there. I don't know. I can't see the other end of the thing. Yeah, that's fine. We'll leave it like that. And then, like I said, if we wanted to, we could select this curve and we could go into its curve properties and we could choose on our depth here to either make that narrower or wider or just remove it altogether. I actually kind of like it wide so that it's almost running into those outer bands that are going around. So we're going to leave it like that. Yeah. So that's one of our examples. And I'm noticing now these are going to start to overlap because when I edited these curves, I didn't compensate for the fact that they were going to get so wide. So let's actually move this over here like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's better. And actually this end of it is now not lining up inside of that cylinder anymore, but you can adjust that. You know what? I'll just go ahead and adjust it. There we go. All right, so that'll be good. And then the next one, let's grab a second one of these beads. So this bead is a bunch of torus objects. It's 4 of them just stacked on top of each other. So 4 donuts. And then I used some Boolean modifiers to cut out some things around the outside of them to give it this kind of texture. So we'll select this one. We'll go into its modifiers again. We'll choose curve. We'll pick our curve. We'll put this one here on the second curve. Again, it's gotten strange, but that's because this curve needs to have its origin over here at the world origin, and now it's still a little strange, but that's because we have to do our Z deform, and then we're going to have to scale this down. But you know what? I'm going to go and hide this object, and the corresponding curve, I think. Not that one. This one, yeah. Just so that we can see this a little bit better so that other stuff's not getting in the way. So now I can scale this down, right? I can move it along the Z-axis this way a little bit to get it started. And then I'm going to add our array modifier. And again, it's probably going to be added in the wrong order. It is. So let's go ahead and move it here first, and then we'll go back into that modifier. And we will adjust it here. So I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to, well, I'll make a couple more copies first. Now I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to pull this back like all the way so that they overlap, kind of like that. And then they make this nice textured thing that's just repeating as it goes along there. So it looks like some sort of a, I don't know, heat shield type of a sheath. To me, at least, that's what it looks like. Yeah, so we've got that one. Then we'll go hide that one and hide the curve that it goes with. Not that one, this one. Yeah. And now we've got this last curve left over, and I think one more example to look at. Yeah, so this one is just 4 cylinders like touching one another here. But crucially, the origin of this piece is in the middle between them all, right? So what's going to happen here is they're going to sort of make a bundle of 4 wires as they go along here. So we're going to add again the modifier that will be the curve, and we're going to select our curve object to put them on. They get all weird, it's fine. We set the origin of this thing back to there. Now we're kind of better. So you'll see we're just repeating these same steps over and over, right? I'm gonna scale those down, not up, definitely not up. And we're gonna move them along the Z until we get them to a good starting place. And I would like to actually scale them down even more. So this is a case, before we do anything else, I'm gonna take this curve that we created and I'm going to remove its depth entirely, right? So it's just the line now. It's serving as a guideline for these things. It's not adding any new geometry. There's no thickness to it at all. And I think that's going to make this look a little bit better for this particular example. So we'll add our array here. Again, it's probably going to be in the wrong place in our stack. Actually, it's not this time, surprisingly. So we can follow that along like so, and we can hit Control and pull these back so that they overlap correctly. And we'll just roll those there. I'm actually going to scale them all down. Oops, I hit escape there. That was not smart. Let's go back to our array. Redo all of that work again. Fortunately, these modifiers are easy to take care of, so I need to click or hit enter to lock that in first. Now I'm going to scale these things down. Yeah. And then I'm going to have to go back into my array modifier and make more copies, of course, because I made the whole thing smaller. So something like that. Cool. So now with that, let's turn our other things all back on. This and the scene. And so now we have several different types of cables. This one isn't in here correctly, so you'd have to, well, we can do it here. Just move it along the Z-axis right this way until it goes inside of there. And actually now it's at the other end not good, so we can adjust our thing and make more copies. There we go. So yeah, you can look at this and make fine adjustments to those modifiers and kind of fix how it's working. But I think this will give you a good idea of kind of some of the things you can do with that curve modifier and adding these kind of bead style objects onto curves. And you can create everything from these simple beads to, you know, some interesting textured pipes and other things as well. So feel free to play around. Let me know if you come up with any cool ideas or create any cool shapes that you put along curves that make some nice looking pipes. That's going to do it for this episode. The reason for doing these pipes was because we have a project that I've got planned coming up in a future episode. It's going to be a multi-episode project, but it's definitely going to need some of this piping idea. And so I wanted to make sure we had covered it here before we get to that. So yeah, that'll do it for today. We've created pipes, tubes, whatever you want to call them. And yeah, hope you had fun. I enjoyed this. I actually learned quite a lot playing around with some of the different styles and things I could do with adding these textures on the outsides of these things. So I will definitely be using some of these techniques in some of my future projects. So with that, I will see you next time. And until then, go create something awesome. See ya.